You need facts, figures, scores, and scoops, and the truth.
The Audio Africa. Welcome to No Punches Pulled. Myself, Colin Nathan, keeping you locked on with this. All my guests, I guess, are special. But this one is special to me because not only is he a fighter we've done a lot of camps together, but I consider him a friend outside of this combat sport of boxing. He's also a former MMA champion and boxing champion as well. Welcome, Boyd Sneaky Allen, to No Punches Pulled.
Thanks so much, Cole.
So, I've always, when I started doing these podcasts and these interviews for the station, I always wanted to get you in because I thought your story is compelling, it's fascinating. You are a fighter who's been a champion in both codes, so both mixed martial arts and boxing. And I just wanted to talk about and embellish you, the fighter, the person. So welcome. And I think let's start it off like this. Everyone remembers their first experience in boxing, or in your case, maybe mixed martial arts. But I want to start in boxing because when you and I first met, which was many moons ago, and I don't really want to make us feel old in this interview, but you said to me your first love has and always will be boxing. So take us back to the first time, because you're a Springs boy, which not a lot of people know, when you first walked into a boxing gym, and why?
Yeah, so I think I was 18. We had almost finished matric, and my younger brother Quaid had gone to Springs Boxing Club. At the time, it was Burke Collins, and he had been sort of nagging me to come and join him for a session for about 2-3 months. And I thought it would be something similar to that of a karate dojo, and not really as serious as what it was as a boxing gym. I didn't really know anything about it. I was getting into a lot of fights on the rugby field and at school and outside of school, etc. But once I went through to the boxing gym, I realized I know nothing about fighting, nothing about boxing, or nothing about defending myself. And that's what sort of gave me the kick to start it. And I had my first boxing training session. They killed us with fitness, bag work, running, skipping, the usual, and then we sparred. And I sparred with a 56-kilo Louis Dazel at the time. He was a silver-graded boxer, amateur boxer, and he gave me a hiding. And I think it was the first time I realized that this isn't about size or physicality. It's more about understanding the sport and having the correct technique to be able to handle a guy I was probably 15, 20 kilos heavier than him, and he gave me a really hard time in 3 really difficult rounds that I'd never sort of experienced before, and that's what sort of made me go, I need to learn how to do this.
So sometimes, when you have that first experience and you get your ass handed to you, I don't want to say fighters at the time, a lot of people won't go back. What drew you back to the sport?
So I went home, and my old man said to me, why are you home so late? So I said, no, I went to a boxing gym. And he said, what do you know about boxing? So I said, I don't know anything about boxing, I just realized. And he said, okay, well, I'll show you how to stand, I'll show you how to throw a jab and a cross. And so stupidly I said to him, how do you know? So he said, well, I was an amateur boxer, I was a pro boxer, and I was the Navy middleweight champion. And I said, geez, why did you never tell me that? And he said, because it's a very difficult sport to get into, and if you're going to do it, you do it because you want to do it, not because somebody's forcing you to try and do it. Because you're not going to want to do that sport if you're being forced to do it. And I think from there I made the decision to pursue it and sort of see where it goes.
So a lot of people also don't know that you had amateur boxing behind you as well. You had amateur bouts, rather, contests. Talk us through that. And do you remember your first opponents, how it went? Because if I remember, you had a record of 26 fights and 4 losses, something like that.
Yeah, it was 33 and 4.
Okay.
I thought it was less, and then Gert Strydom found my book not so long ago, and he said to me, no, you were 33 and 4.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, okay, well, that'll be nice. I want to get the book from him just to see my record, etc., and my former opponents. And I think my first fight was at the Tony Green Hall in Boksburg. I fought a green-graded boxer. I got into a big fight the night before with a bunch of my friends, bust my hand. And
you bust your hand?
Yeah, I bust my right knuckle. I pushed the knuckle cap back. And I thought, oh, well, I won't fight today. It was supposed to be my first fight. we stood in a line, and the doctor checked us, and they checked our teeth and our hands and the usual. And he pushed me to the side because he could see my hand was swollen. So they weren't going to let me compete. And Jeanette Dazel, the coach at the time at Bert Collins, pushed me back in, and she said, no, he's going to learn if he wants to get into fights. And I think he's not going to fight because he's been training. He's got another thing coming. So I had to fight with an injured hand. I ended up winning the fight, but I also learned a lesson that it's pretty stupid to go out and get into trouble if you're going to be competing in this type of sport. And
So-
that was my first fight experience.
Well, yeah, I actually want to go back because I want to, obviously, I'm like curious now. So tell us about the fight before, the night before. What was going on?
So we were at a party, and we got a call from a friend that was at another party. Guys had locked him in a house. There was always big rivalry between English and Afrikaans in Springs. And we raced over there, and obviously there was a group of them, there was a group of us, and we got into a full-on punch-up. And we eventually got our mates out of the house, and we ended up leaving, but not without any injuries. So put my hand in ice water, the swelling wouldn't go down, my knuckle was all swollen, and I could hardly close my hand. And the next day I had to fight, and the guy that I fought was a former green-graded boxer, green gloves, but hadn't fought for 2 years. So they put him up against me, who was having his first fight as a red-graded boxer. And I ended up winning in the third round. I stopped him, and it was just a jab that I pretty much used the entire 3 rounds because my right hand was bust.
Do you remember any notable names on your amateur record?
I fought Alfonso Thyssen in amateurs.
How did that go?
I beat him at a boxing down. It was a boxing down at a place called the Knights of Dagama, and I won on points. That was probably one of the top amateur guys that I had fought that still went through to do reasonably well in professional. Other than that, not too many names. I was always around guys like DJ Creel. He was an up-and-comer. Flo Simba. They were always in the gyms and at all the other gyms when there were fight nights or competition day.
So, if I recall, you went to Harold Fallback to kind of flirt with the idea of potentially crossing over to professional boxing. Am I correct?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So I wanted to take boxing a little bit further, and I was doing reasonably well in my amateurs. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well make some money off of it and see how far I can go. And I'd said to my old man, I want to try and go pro. So he said, well, I know Harold. I used to train with him at Springs Boxing Club. Him and I don't really get along too well. We had some heavy sparring sessions. But let me take you through to his gym. So we went through to his gym in Turffontein in the south. I think it was called Body and Pulse. And him and Brian Mitchell ran a gym there. And he introduced me to Harold. And I could kind of see there was a little bit of animosity between the two of them, and I didn't really understand why. And I think I went through 2-3 times a week for about 6 months, and all I did was really hit the bag. So eventually I said to him one day, Uncle Harold, I'd really like to go pro. When do you think I'd be ready? What do I need to do to get to that level, etc.? And he just said, look, I'll be honest with you, there's no future for young white guys in boxing in South Africa. So I thought, well, that's kind of a bit of a spanner in the works. But if that's the case, I'm going to try my hand out in MMA. And
Yeah, so that's obviously the next question I wanted to go through with you. And then how did that all start? That journey with MMA, I mean, you obviously remember your first experience walking in. Obviously, cage fighting was on the rise. It started blossoming in South Africa, and then obviously EFC came along and just took the market by storm because it wasn't really, and I'm not diminishing what the other promotions at the time were doing, but they came with the glitz and the glamour on the production side and, big venues. What was the first experience that you remember for your MMA career?
So my first MMA experience or fight was at the Coca-Cola Dome at a musical event called Seasons with a 4. And I fought undefeated amateur 5-0 Wade Groth. And it was my first amateur fight, but I had obviously had quite a bit of amateur boxing experience. And I beat him over 3 rounds on points. And it was quite a crazy experience. There were no like sanctioning body rules in place. So we were fighting with normal professional MMA gloves, no shin pads, no headgear, but the rule was there was no ground and pound to the head once you hit the deck. So that was the only difference between professional and amateur, other than the fact that you can't use knees and elbows. But it was a fight, and it was a tough fight because of the sort of experience I had in that art. I was very new. I think I'd been at MMA training for probably 3-4 weeks, and they said to me, "Do you want to fight?" And I was always keen to sort of test myself, and I never really cared who they put me up against. So when they offered me the guy like Wade Groth, who was the biggest name in amateurs at the time, I didn't even think about it really. I just thought, well, if I want to be good at this, I got to fight guys that are good, and that's how it started.
And so let me just ask you, did you have to go for some sort of grading to become an MMA fighter? Like you doing professional boxing through Boxing South Africa, you go through the Sonabo system, which is the amateur ranks, and then obviously you go to spar. Depending on the nature of where you're at as an amateur, some, if you're a South African gold medalist, I don't think they've waived it anymore, but now everyone has to spar. But did you have to do some sort of grading to become an MMA fighter, or was that just amateur? And then how just explain to us the platforms between the amateur and pros.
So I think at the time there was nothing like that. There was no grading practices in place. There were no levels. It was sort of, you've got a record of this, and we're going to match you with a guy like this. And that's kind of how they played it up. You're similar size and weight, we're going to put you guys together. But in the beginning, I think it was sort of all over the show, and it very quickly became quite organized. And they started having gradings, etc., for the amateurs to go pro. I fought 13 amateur fights in 1 year between 2010 and 2011. And I won all 13, and I was disqualified in one of my fights against a guy named Sean Hubert at Shido Fighting Systems in Pretoria. And I think that was my only loss on my MMA.
Why were you disqualified?
They had said to me it was a full contact fight. I took him down, I mounted him, and when I was on top of him, I dropped an elbow from sort of a mounted position. They stopped it, and they said, you can't ground and pound. So I said, no, I'm fighting full contact. And they said it was a full contact fight, because some guys were doing sort of amateur rules, and then there was full contact rules. And the guy that I was fighting said no to the full contact, which I didn't know. So when I mounted him and I threw that shot, they stopped the fight and they DQ'd me. They gave me another fight on the same day against a guy from France who was a Savat kickboxing champion, who I then beat over 2 rounds. And that was a full contact fight where I finished him with elbows, etc. So I finished my 13 amateur fights in 1 year, and I was going for my 14th in January of 2011. And Larry Foster and Mark Stradham, the owners of an event called Fight Force down in Durban, had said to me, your opponent's pulled out, but we have another opponent for you. The only problem is he's a professional. Would you like to go pro? And even at that stage, I said, yeah, I'd love to go pro. They said, we'd pay you for the fight. It would be the first time I was being paid for a fight, so I was all excited. And they said, you can use knees and elbows. And it's obviously something that I was looking forward to after amateurs. So I took the fight against Etienne van Wyk, who was my first pro fight, fighting out of CIT. And I won unanimous decision on points. And that's where it sort of started for me in my pro career. And I had 6 fights with Fight Force as a professional in 1 year, from 2011 to 2012. And that's where I joined FFM in January 2012. So
where were you before that?
I was training at Rio Grappling in Springs with Jiu-Jitsu black belt Jürgen Pitter, and I would train at Titan Fight Club with Tiny Strauss and Gert Stradham. He was the boxing coach there, which is why I loved to go to the fight club and train there, because Gert took me on pads for the first time, and I realized, oh, this is what professional boxers actually do, and how they train and how they hit pads and work, because I had never experienced that when I was training at Harold's gym. So I love going through there purely for the boxing work with Gert, and then obviously the training partners and the new experiences that I was having with different guys from different backgrounds, kickboxing, wrestling, that type of thing. So I would jump between Titan Fight Club and Rio Grappling in Springs, And I would do my normal weight training, etc., in the morning and my runs. And when I had the chance, I would go back to Boyd Collins and train a few sessions there with the guys until I moved from Springs to Sunninghill, where I joined Fight Fit. That's when, at the time, I was 4-2 as a professional, and started at FFM in 2012, and had my first fight out of there against Donald and Zawara in the EFC March 12th, 2012.
Why did you switch camps?
I think they were the leading camp at the time, and Tiny had said to me, out of all the guys in the gym, it looks like I want to take it further and take it more seriously. And he said, but if you're going to do that, you can't really train here with us, because they weren't trying to grow fighters. They had a gym, and it was sort of it was more a fun thing for them to have, like their own gym where they can train and do their thing. And Tiny had said to me, let me take you through to meet Richie and Chef, and let's see how you enjoy it and see if you can become a part of the team. But you would have to stop working and train full time. And I went and I met Rich and Chef. We had an interview, and that was December 2011, and January 2012 I started there training full time.
It seemed at the time, and I was one of those boxing trainers, where the MMA guys would have their jits coach, and then they would go to a boxing gym or have a boxing coach. That was about 10, 15 years ago, maybe even more. It seems to have fizzled out, where the MMA coaches kind of do everything under one roof.
Yeah.
Why do you...
Back at it, I could understand pretty much why they would do that, in being able to look after their fighters on a daily basis, know exactly what they're doing, know exactly how they're training, how many sessions they're doing, what kind of damage they're taking, and whether they're training correctly or not. As I got further and further on into my career, I realized that it would probably be better to mix up training, go to different gyms, get different experience, train with some different coaches, and just from a learning experience, I think that sort of opened up a lot of avenues and doors for me too.
The conventional way of boxing is the same as MMA?
No.
Yeah.
I think if you take a pure MMA fighter who's never really experienced boxing and you put him into a boxing ring, he's going to be in a world of trouble. And we've seen that before with the sparring sessions with some of the MMA guys, because it's a different type of pressure, it's a different type of fitness, it's a different type of range. And only once they're in there and they experience that with a professional boxer who's actually trying to put the heat on them a little bit, they realize very quickly, okay, this is a difficult sport, and it's an art in itself. Boxing, you don't really have a second to rest. There's no stall time. You might be able to hold on for a few seconds until the ref says break, but then you're back in the fight. In MMA, you have a lot of positions that you can rest, you can stall, you can slow the game down, you can push the guy up against the cage, you can use your legs to keep him at range, you can wrestle, you can grapple. And those are all things that are happening while you're not getting punched. Boxing, you're constantly getting hit, the guy's constantly on top of you, and there's a lot of pressure. So it's a very different game altogether.
You won the featherweight EFC championship 2014.
Yes.
Talk us through that moment.
So I'd always sort of taken a back step from fighting for the title, because my teammate at the time, DeMart Penner, was the undefeated featherweight champion. And we had sort of, EFC had tried to get us to fight each other, but we wouldn't, because we were pretty close and we trained together every day. So we declined the fight. But EFC had phoned me and said they would like me to do a super fight. Don Madge's opponent has pulled out, and you got 2 weeks, would you like to take the fight? So I had originally already signed the featherweight title fight, because DeMart was now dropping down to bantamweight to fight for the bantamweight title. And that kind of gave me the opportunity to take that featherweight spot. And just before that, they phoned me and said, would you fight Don Madge? So I thought, well, I want to be the best in this game, so I might as well fight the best. He's a weight division above me, but I'll go up, I'll fight him, and sort of see where it goes from there. I'm still going to fight for the featherweight title a month and a half later, so I'm not really going to lose out on anything. If anything, I get good experience. And I ended up drawing with Don Madge over 5 rounds.
in Cape Town.
in
I remember
Cape Town.
watching that fight.
And
Yeah.
that sort of made me realize, sheesh, I'm actually at the top with these guys, because he was one of the top in the division at the time, in the lightweight division. And his next fight was a title fight. My next fight was a title fight. So the fact that we drew was very good for both of us. I think if one of us had lost, it would have looked a little bit weird if that person had now gone and fought for a title and won. They would have said, but you just lost to this guy. So he should technically be that title holder. So a draw was probably the best outcome for both of us. He went on to win the lightweight title. I went on to fight Baron Nienaber for the featherweight title, which I then defended a few times thereafter. I then fought Leon Maynard for a non-title fight, but he was the current lightweight champion at the time, and I beat him unanimously over 3 rounds for no title on the line. Had they put the title on the line and I won, I would have been the featherweight and lightweight champion.
Where is Leon Maynard currently?
He's apparently a cowboy in the States somewhere, Arizona.
Yeehaw!
Yeah, he was fighting some bare knuckle. I think he fought 1 or 2 bare knuckle fights where he did reasonably well and made some decent money. But the one fight that he had, I know the promoter sort of screwed them. It was a fly-by-night. So got a whole bunch of guys to fight bare knuckle and then disappeared and never paid the guys. And I think from there he just sort of ventured into other areas.
You also tried his hand in pro boxing. And a lot of people actually remember that.
Yeah.
So then successful at UFC, successful in MMA. 2017, I get a visit from you. And I was like, hey, Boyd, what's going on? And we've been friends for a few years before you come in and out. And I'm not disrespecting some of your teammates, but you were the only guy who could really hang with some of the fighters in the gym, because a lot of the other guys just were out of their depth, if I'm perfectly candid with you. And I think you'd agree with that. And obviously we're not going to mention names, but you did really, really well. And I always said, like, you know, you got good skill. And that's when I found out about your boxing career as an amateur and, you know, the platform and the base that you'd had when you were in Springs. And then you looked at me and you kind of was like, hey, Boyd, what's up? You come to sparring? I was like, I've come to talk to you. And you said to me, I want to maybe cross over. And I was like, wow, really? So we had to wait for the licensing, which is in 2018. Yeah. But at the time, I'd had a fallout which obviously was kind of exploded onto the South African market with my former promoter. But at the time, we were still okay. And when you decided to turn pro in 2018, you went into professional boxing. Talk us through the...
Obviously, I came to the gym that day, and I had been sparring with Warren Ubert, Rainer Liebenberg, and after every sparring session, the guys would say to me, why don't you fight pro? So I said, geez, guys, I don't know if I can, you know, and they said, we champions, and you're sparring with us, and you're doing well, and why don't you give it a shot, which is when I spoke to you and said, maybe we look at a sort of South African Mayweather-McGregor type vibe. And I think that had sort of just happened, and that was a hype, and people were talking about it. So I thought, well, why don't I be the first one to try and win a title in both sports in South Africa? And I had said to my head coach, Richie, at the time, I want to pursue this a little bit and see if I can do both. And Rich was very for it. He knew I loved boxing, and he said to me, well, if you're going to do it, you're going to go to Colin and you're going to train there and you're going to make sure that you're doing everything you need to do the same as you would in MMA, which I did. And I sort of committed myself to pure boxing for about 2.5 years, fully, sort of not even training in any MMA unless it was to take a class at the gym for jiu-jitsu or wrestling or whatever the case is. So I focused for about 2.5 years just boxing and put my MMA career on a hold so that I could achieve what I wanted to and sort of test myself where I wanted to.
Did you miss MMA when you were boxing?
Yes and no. I missed the fact that you can be very creative when you're fighting. There's a lot of ways to win and a lot of ways to lose. But the damage you take is significant. It feels sort of like you've been in a car accident for 2 weeks after an MMA fight, obviously depending on the fight. But if it's a tough fight and you go to a war sort of thing, you're going to be sore for a long time. Where a boxing fight, it's not always like that. 2 days later, you could spar again if you wanted to. Granted, you hadn't been knocked out or you have concussion or anything like that. So I did miss it. I missed the training and the group of guys that I used to train with, because I was sort of putting all my time and energy into the boxing. And the more I did that, the more I fell in love with it. So I wanted to prove myself, and there was a lot of naysayers saying, like, he's an MMA fighter, he's never going to be able to make it in boxing. And I think that also put fuel on the fire for me. I wanted to prove those people wrong.
Also, I want to mention that, and it's important to make this comment, that Reino Liebenberg to this day says you are the most awkward guy that he's ever sparred with in his entire career. Yeah. You have a nickname of Sneaky, and that's because you're a very sharp, quick, accurate counterpuncher with a stinging shot that will make you very honest very quickly. And equally, you are very hard to pin down. I think that's one of your main attributes. You also switch orthodox southpaw, and you do it very naturally. And you confuse a lot of people who are sometimes less experienced than you, sometimes more experienced than you, and you seem to have the upper hand of slowing a pace down, which you are very well known for. Tell us about that shifty movement, because I've seen a few of your cage fights. I've been ringside for some of your cage fights. Equally, I've been ringside for some of your fights. And you and I have obviously been in the corner working together. Tell us about your style and why it works for you.
So I think originally it was sort of the same sort of base as everyone. The amateurs, they had a certain structure we had to follow, a certain style that we had to have. It was obviously point-based. And I mean, you couldn't really fight with your hands down. You had to have hands up, nice and tight, straight shots down the middle, and that was how I was taught from the beginning. When I got to FFM and I started training with Rich, it was very similar because it was very Muay Thai based style. So also hands up, staying nice and tight, and sort of being able to defend and attack when needed. But when I got the call to fight Leon Maynard, I had been watching him from my amateur MMA days, and I'd sort of had the feeling that I might fight him one day. Not that I was pushing for it. I always respected him as a fighter. But when I got the offer, I said to Rich, they've just phoned me to fight Leon. It's in 3 weeks. Dave Mazzani's out with staph infection. And Rich said to me, are you sure you want to take this? Your ribs are a bit bust. And Leon's a good champion. So I said, Rich, I've been watching Leon for a long time. If I'm going to take this fight, I've got to fight him in a way that I want to fight him. So he said, what do you mean? So I said, I've got to kind of fight him with my hands down and be loose and all over the show. And he said, okay, let's work on it for the next 3 weeks and see how it goes, which we did. And I was giving the guys a hard time in the gym because they couldn't see where the punches were coming from. And that's sort of where my style developed. And to add to that, we started adding in switching. And more from a range control point of view, not really to be able to fight from both stances, more just to be able to control the range really quickly. And I started practicing throwing a jab with my right hand instead of my left hand, and throwing a hook with my right hand instead of my left hand, etc. Till eventually I built up an arsenal where I could try it in a fight for the first time. And I think the first time I switched in a fight was against Wesley Hawke in a title fight. I switched southpaw and I threw an uppercut cross. And that was the first time I had ever sort of done that from the opposite stance, and then started building on that, practicing more in training, purely training as a southpaw, even sparring as a southpaw against orthodox guys, so that I could really understand what it was that I needed to look out for. Because when it comes to switching stances, it's not the fact that you might not be as good as a puncher in that stance. It's the fact that you don't see the punches from the other person because you're changing your hands and your levels. And I had to learn that pretty quickly. And I got caught in a few fights with some overhand rights when I switched, etc. But once I got used to it and started to find my range, I was very comfortable, and I am very comfortable with my style.
So when you turned pro, you fought for Golden Gloves Promotions, who it's well documented that we fell out. Fosim Tolo was in your corner. You were moved relatively very quickly. You had a draw, and then you fought John Bopapi for the WBA Pan-African Junior Middleweight Championship, who Bopapi on his day could knock anyone out. Very dangerous fighter. I remember you telling me afterwards, because I stepped back and I was like, look, I don't want to jeopardize your position. I want you to succeed. We were always friends, and that's something I also want to talk about in this interview, is that very few people dislike you, Boyd. You're one of those guys that, everyone loves Boyd. But I stepped back because I didn't want to jeopardize your position where you were at the time. You beat John Paul Papi, and then you fought Brendan Taser, and you were not favored to win that fight. You were the underdog, and you ended up winning a majority decision. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, he was trying to get rough with you in the inside. I remember you telling me the story, and I want to go through it with you again, where he either lifted his elbow up or his shoulder, and your clinch, obviously, from grappling and jits, and you're a brown belt, by the way. Yes. And that's very important to talk about as well, to mention rather. And you got him you tied him up, and you whispered in his ear, and you said, if you do that again, talk us through that moment. Let's talk us through the moment.
So, yeah, I mean, Golden Gloves pushed me pretty quickly, and I think due to our relationship, we had a good understanding of it, and we knew that it wasn't going to be easy for me if you were in the corner. So that was the first step, and quite a nervous one at that, because not having you there and having been at the gym with you in the corner was quite a big change up. But Vusi obviously knew what he was doing. Richie was in the corner.
Yeah.
I had my first fight against Laban and Tashani. Then I fought Vaynant Miller, and then I fought John Papi in my third fight, and Brandon in my fourth fight. Brandon was getting super frustrated with my style, and battled a lot with the southpaw in the first fight. And during the fight, we had sort of clinched up, and he started sort of bumping me with the shoulder and lifting his elbow up. So I tied him up in sort of like a Muay Thai clinch. And I said to him, if you really want to fight, we can fight, but you're going to lose that one. And the moment that happened, he sort of stepped back and he started to try and box. And when he did that, it was to my advantage, because he realized that he can't actually beat me in a fight. He can beat me possibly in a boxing match, but not a real fight. And I think that played on his head a little bit. And we sort of flew through the rounds. He was a decorated boxer, and I think his family were decorated boxers. So there was a lot of tension in the arena that night, and it was a good win for me.
And then, so I want to talk about the tournament, and then the promoter gave you a call, which I didn't really want to get into, but you were basically told who to train with, because there was Rourke Knapp with Vusi Mtolo, and there was going to be a junior middleweight tournament amongst all these guys. And you needed to go to Peter Smith, who I love and adore. We've had our differences in the past during, talking smack and stuff leading up to fights. But you phoned me up and you said, look, I've got to go, what do you think? I don't have to go, but what do you think? And I stepped back and I was like, boy, do what you need to do to further your career, as long as we remain friends. Yeah. But I have to say that Peter's style of coaching you just did not suit your style. You had a rematch with Brandon, which I really want to embellish, because to this day I still talk about it, where, Peter's a very conventional kind of coach, where you more here. And I just thought the styles of fighter and trainer didn't mesh. Yeah. Talk us through that moment. How difficult was it? Because Peter's a great guy, and I'm sure you're still friends with him.
Yeah, so I joined Peter's camp after they had announced that the Super 4 would be happening with the 4 top junior middleweights. Obviously, myself, at the time, I was number 1. There was Rourke Knapp, Brandon Taser, and Tristan Trutzer. Rourke and I were obviously training out of Hotbox at the time. And Rodney Berman had said to me, look, if you want to be in this tournament, you can't train with Colin or at Hotbox. You have to go somewhere else. So I said, well, where would I go and train? So he said, you have to go to Peter. I knew Peter. I knew Sean and George reasonably well from a social point of view, but I had never trained at their gym. And Richie had said to me, look, if you're going to go and train there, even though it may be uncomfortable because change so soon is hard, you have to fully commit to that style and that coaching so that you can get whatever he's giving you. And I did that. And it didn't work for me. The style didn't suit me. Because like you said, he was a very traditional boxing-based coach. And in fact, most boxing coaches are. To this day, if I go to other gyms and spar, etc., and coaches see me, they go, hey, don't do that. Don't do this. Don't. And you were the only coach that sort of went, okay, let me see where this goes. And there were times where you'd say, I don't mind you doing this, but make sure when you do, you're not walking into a right hand, or you're not doing this. So you never really said, don't do that. You just said, be careful of, which sort of educated me more and more, and also made me trust my style a little bit more and more. Where a lot of coaches said, no, you don't fight with your hand down, you have to keep your hands up, etc. Right. And you can't switch stances, you must be in one stance. But then we started seeing guys like Vasily Lomachenko switching stances and moving the way he did, and I thought, well, that's more my style. And I think I trained at Peter Smith for 10 months. The first fight I had there was Tristan Trutzer. That was after my draw against Alexander Zurowski from the Ukraine.
Oh, 8 rounds, I remember
from
that.
Kazakhstan, sorry. And yeah, that was a tough fight. He burst my eardrum. And I think 3 or 4 weeks later, we had the start of the tournament where we went into all the interviews and we started doing that wheel spin and building it up. And I ended up beating Tristan Trutzer. And what I had said to Peter in the back was, bear with me. I haven't been with you for too long. I might still switch, etc. But I'll do my best to practice what we've trained. And he said, no problem. And in that fight, I did switch. I managed to finish him in round 10, and the second fight with Brandon Tace, Peter had said to me, I don't want you switching, I want you to stay orthodox, use the right hand, and that had worked for me previously against Tristan, because I had finished him with a nice big right hand and a left hook, and he sort of pushed that, and I just wasn't comfortable. When I got into the fight, the first 2 rounds went really well. And then round 3, I felt like I wanted to switch. And the moments I did, I got told, don't do that, kind of thing. And I think it just sort of put my head in a difficult place. And I got caught with a beautiful left hook. I think he fainted low with the right hand and came in with the left hook. And he put me on my ass. I managed to get up, walk to the corner.
Yes, I want to, before we get there, because I want to talk about that. I thought, if I'm honest, and I'm not going to BS you, especially on this platform, I thought you were behind the first 2 rounds. You didn't look yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe you thought you did well. From my opinion, I thought you were losing the fight.
Yeah.
You just didn't look like Boyd, to be honest. And then on that left hook, which was a flush shot, he touched, like went down and he caught you up.
Yeah.
Beautifully timed shot. You went down hard. And I want to talk this moment through, because Jaap van Evenezen was the referee, and I love Jaap. Yeah. But I think there's, and again, I want to talk about this, when you got put down and you got up. I thought you were hurt, but I thought by 5, 6, 7, you were looking at Jaap and you were clear-eyed and you were ready to go on. But you had your arms up on the ropes. Yeah. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that there's the rules and regulations, and then there's the spirit of the sport. Yeah. Now, the spirit of the sport is, there was 2 moments in that fight, 2 scenarios that could have happened. One, obviously, which he did, counted you out. And the other was to pull your arms down and say, walk to me. Are you okay? And, and see how you respond. And I often get into this debate in the rules that are given by the referee before the fight in the dressing room, where those are the rules and it's in the spirit of the sport, because you can also rob the fans and the fighter himself of either winning and the fans of just such a fantastic, contest. I thought you were good enough to carry on. You still kind of looked at Jaap and said, why did you count me out? Yeah. Tell us that moment when you got put over and you got up.
Yeah, so I got up and I stumbled a bit. I think I took 1 or 2 steps to the side. I could see when I rewatched the fight, I said, okay, there I can see that I'm not 100%. But I got to the corner reasonably quickly, considering I got caught with such a big punch. I got up straight away. Walked to the corner and I put my arms on the rope stupidly.
But you didn't know. That's the point.
Yeah, so... And when he started counting, I sort of looked at Brandon. I could see he was ready to come at me. I had already heard the 10-second clapper go, so I knew there wasn't much time left in the round. I sort of just need to move around,
survive,
and not get hit for 8 to 10 seconds. And I was comfortable to do that. And he got to 8, and then he went 9. And when he said 9, I kind of looked at him like, why are you passing 8?
Yeah.
And he said 10, and he waved the fight off. And I said, ref, what are you doing? Yeah. And he said, you've submitted, your arms are on the ropes.
Yeah, so I just want to go back. So I just want to go back and talk about that, because some referees will say when you get dropped, you got to show me that you're able to carry on fighting. Yeah. don't have your arms up in the ropes. But when you got dropped in that position, you were in shock.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like your thought process is, okay, the ropes are there. You didn't really realize at the point, well, I forgot what he had said to me. Was it that moment where you thought, I forgot that he had said that to me in the instructions in the dressing room, possibly?
Yeah, so what had happened was I turned to Peter and I said, Peter, what is he doing? And Peter was so pissed off at him for stopping the fight that I think he swore at him. So I got back to the change room and I said, I don't really understand. And he said, no, it is a rule, but it's an amateur rule. And I went and I Googled it and I said, oh shit, he's right. It is a rule. You're not allowed your arms on the ropes when you're waiting for...
But it's also on the discretion of the referee, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, we saw a pro fight after that where Reno dropped Rowan. And he was dropped quite badly. And he had his arms on the rope. And the ref sort of just grabbed his gloves and said, continue, you know.
In the spirit of the sport.
And you see that so many times. Tyson Fury with Usyk, etc., he would get dropped and the ref would just pull his arms, clean the gloves and carry on. So you sort of expect that. And I was a bit sour about it for a little while. But I'd spoken to my old man and I told him the story. And he said, look, in hindsight, he could have saved you from an even worse knockout. So you got to look at it that way and sort of accept it for what it is. And that kind of made me relax a little bit and go, okay, I'm not angry at Yop. I'm more angry at myself for not understanding the rules better.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a debate whether or not, you know, you could have won. And I mean, I just don't think you were yourself that night. And I'm not saying that you would have beaten Brendan, but at least, you know, have another go at it. Because I do think Brendan probably would have beaten you that night. Yeah. Maybe. But again,
my style at the time and the way sort of things were changing. I mean, I felt fit, I felt strong, but I wasn't comfortable in my style that I was asked to perform in. And I do think that night just wasn't my night. So I could have gone 12 rounds and I'm sure I would have lost the fight regardless. But it's a learning experience. And I realized then that I'm not going to change my style, not for a coach or anyone else, because I know that my style protects me and I can sort of stay safe. And when I start taking damage, if you say to me in the corner, listen, you can't have your hands down anymore, you're taking too many shots, pick them up, I'll listen and I'll do that. But I'll still fight in a sort of style that makes me feel comfortable and makes me move the way that I move. And like I said, that learning experience you can only get from going through that.
You've been in both codes. Both are riddled with politics. You've been on the receiving end of both. Which would you say, which sport has the worst politics?
So I'd say boxing.
Why?
I think purely because they've been around longer. I think MMA, especially with like the likes of EFC, there's one big promotion and they kind of know all the fighters know them, they have reasonably good relationships with them, and there's not too much that can sort of be thrown at you out of the blue, and there aren't too many different titles, there aren't different promotions. It's EFC, those are the weights, those are the titles. So when push comes to shove and there's politics involved, it's quite a simple answer. Where in boxing, it's very different. There's a lot of promotions. There's a lot of fighters. Everyone wants a cut. There's managers.
You're saying you don't like me, Boyd?
No. In fact, you're probably one of the only guys that I know that makes sure that he looks after his boxers before anything else, which is why you have the guys that you do at your gym and the talents and the youngsters coming up, because they know they can sort of trust you and they can go, I can put my career in Colin's hands and he'll make sure that I'm pushed in the right direction. And you never baby guys. You never look after them in a sense of, I'm just going to give you easy fights all the time. You make sure that they have the correct matchups with the right experience for the right purse, because they put a lot of time and effort into it. And not a lot of coaches or managers make sure of those things.
Yeah, you went back to, you signed up with the Powerhouse Risen after COVID. Yeah. You fought in Japan. What was that experience like?
It was unbelievable. Japan is a beautiful country. The people are amazing. And just an all-round amazing experience. The promotion itself was beautifully well run. We fought in front of 12,000 people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It was massive, and it was a silent crowd. 12,000 people, dead quiet, watching you fight is not like a South African crowd. The South African crowd gets rowdy. They're screaming and shouting and clapping. it's a big energy. Right? Where in Japan they were dead quiet. And
It's a good energy, but they're quiet. They're very respectful and
unless you pull off something like quite spectacular, you won't hear a thing. I mean, I went for a rolling knee bar in my first fight, and you heard the crowd sort of go, ooh, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was like, geez, it was a rolling knee bar, guys, come on, give me a hand, kind of thing. But amazing experience. I didn't win either of my fights in Japan. My first fight, I lost unanimous decision to Yosaki Yulka. And my second fight, I lost to, his name was Yulka Sasaki, or something to that effect. And it was a 3-round fight. I won round 1 and I lost the other 2 rounds, sort of knowingly going into round 2 that I was in a little bit of trouble. And that's when I was in ICU for 3 days with
kidney failure
afterwards.
Cutting down to 66 kilograms.
And I don't think it was the cut to 66. Like you said, I was the featherweight champ and I fought there for a long time. I think it was the process in the way I did it, that specific cut. Water loading, flying, 2 days to the fight, and then sitting in a sauna at 100 degrees for 3.5 hours to try and pull the weight off. I ended up with heat stroke, potassium poisoning, dehydration, and kidney failure. So I was in ICU
Is that all?
3 days. Yeah. So, yeah, also a lesson learned with regards to weight cuts. I do it a lot smarter now. I watch my nutrition. I also keep my weight a lot lower, closer to walk around weight. So I'm normally close to 72, 73 kilos. Where before I was always 76, 77 kilos cutting down. That sort of taught me that your body is the most important and you need to look after that, especially if you're going to be fighting consistently. And I have been for 17 years now.
You also fought in Russia?
In Russia, in Moscow, for Fight Nights Global in front of 22,000 people. That was insane. Probably one of the most hardcore environments I've fought in.
Yeah.
Once they stitched me up after the fight with both eyes, I had cuts on both.
Yeah, you sent me a picture the next day. I think I might still have it, actually.
Yeah, they didn't use any local They stitched me up straight away. And then afterwards, they asked me if you wanted an injection because they couldn't speak English. And they gave me an injection and I could feel nothing for about 12 hours, which was great. But I fought Khabib's cousin, Yunuslan Magomed, and he gave me an absolute beating.
Yeah, he was a wrestler. I remember you telling me he was just incredibly strong.
12-time national Sambo champion.
Okay.
And he was just unbelievable when it came to the wrestling. The striking I could handle, but the moment he shot for a takedown, I could not get him off of me, and he controlled the fight there for 3 rounds. First round, he snapped my arm in 3 places in an attempted armbar. And in round 3, he popped my knee, broke my orbital, broke my nose, and gave me 13 stitches in both eyes. So it was quite an experience going to Russia, fighting a guy of that caliber in front of that many people and getting my ass handed to me like I did.
And you can still laugh about it. And then you gave me another call and you said, Colin, I want to get back to the ring. Yeah. And ESPN Africa was prominent at that stage. And we scheduled you for an 8-round comeback fight, you could say, since Brendan Taser had stopped you. What a lot of people don't know, and I actually want to talk about that as well. You got cut on the bridge of your nose.
Broke it.
Broke it, fractured actually, and there was a cut, and it was quite severe. Dude's kind of looking at me, our producer, like, did that really happen? But, my first impression was like, oh, we're going to pull you out the fight. And you were like, let me just go and take a look. And Rich was actually there as well. And I said, I thought about it. And like 10 minutes later, I said, just go and get it assessed and let's take a look. Yeah. It wasn't life-threatening. You wore makeup to the weigh-in, which I might get into hot water for this, but you passed and everything was good. I don't think it was that bad, to be honest.
Yeah,
you seemed a bit gun-shy in that fight, but that's because of your nose. Yeah. Talk us through that experience, because what also, like, what I want to mention is that when fighters go through camps and they fight, there's always something that happens. Yeah. There's a niggle, there's a sore ankle.
Fight at 100%. They're all very seldom you're going to a fight at feeling 100%, no injuries, and you're at the top of the game. But that specific day, I was sparring with Reno, and through his beautiful signature sort of looping overhand left, and it came down on my nose and broke it. And he stopped and he apologized because he knew that I was fighting a week later. It was on the Thursday and I was fighting the following Thursday. And you and Rich said, "Oh, you're gonna have to get it checked out. We might have to pull the fight." And I went to the mirror with my towel and I sort of straightened it myself because I knew if it set, I would have a problem. They would have to re-break it under operation, etc. So I just kind of quickly broke it back into place, and it set quite nicely in that sense. Still a little bit skew, but I think I used Elizabeth Arden 8-hour repair that the ladies use on their skin at night, and it healed the cut up in a matter of 3 days. Monday or Tuesday came and we had the interviews, and I wore makeup and a cap so they couldn't sort of see my eyes and my nose. On fight nights, we were standing in the corner. I've got a picture where you can clearly see I've got 2 blue eyes before the fights even started. So yeah, also a learning experience, but like you say, we don't really have the luxury of being 100% going into every fight. And I wasn't going to put in 8 to 10 weeks of a camp and then not fight because of a broken nose.
You came back recently in Cape Town with a win over 6 rounds. Definitely the Boyd Allen we know, the sneaky guy, keeps shifting, comprehensively beating your opponents on points. You're now scheduled to fight on the 15th of March for Aquila Boxing Promotions. Where are you doing? Are you doing your camp with us?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, no. I've been hired. Where at the age of 35, would it be fair to say, and your stablemate Martin van Staden just came back vintage, won the EFC lightweight championship again, and he's 41, where do you see yourself now? Is this the final phase of Boyd Allen's MMA and boxing career? Where are you at?
So I think before Martin had done what he did, there was kind of like, maybe I got another year or 2 in me where I can compete relatively well at a high level. And you have to sort of be honest with yourself, because if timing and reaction starts going, then you shouldn't be in this game. But Mart's also showed us that at 41 you can still be very sharp and you can beat some of the best guys in the world, which he did. So I think I'm going to sort of take it as it comes. If my body is in good health and my mind is in good health, then I'll compete for as long as I love to compete. But I'm at a stage where if I don't want to compete, I don't have to. I've done and achieved what I've wanted to, and obviously there's always more goals and more achievements, and there sort of comes a time where you go, I'm not chasing that anymore. If it comes, it comes, but I fight because I love it. And then you see a guy like Mart, who beats I think undefeated for 6 years, double champ, where everyone wrote him off to lose that fight, didn't just win it but dominated. You can go, okay, well, if Mark can do that at 41, what am I crying about at 35? And do I still love the game? Yes. Am I fully committed? Yes. I train every day. I run my own gym. So
Yeah, Apex. I was going to give you a punt towards the end, which is coming up in the next minute or so, yeah.
So I'm in the industry all the time, every day. And I think even once I do stop fighting, I'd like to help other up-and-coming fighters with, their training and their education on the sport, because a lot of youngsters don't really know what they're doing, and that's where the wrong promoters or managers can take advantage of them. And fortunately, through the 17 years of my experience, I've learned a little bit and can sort of guide them with guys like yourself and Gert around us to make sure that they're not making the same mistakes myself or other fighters have done.
Boyd Allen runs the successful Apex Gym in Benmore. He joined us here this morning on No Punches Pulled by myself, Colin Nathan. Boyd, thank you very much for coming through. Great interview. Looking forward to kicking your ass in the gym when you come soon.
Likewise.
And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you for having me.
Our daily opinion on sport, which you're entitled to.